The farmhouse sat like a forgotten prayer at the end of County Road 12. Its white paint grayed by decades of Vermont winters, its shutters hanging crooked like tired eyelids that had seen too much and slept too little. Snow had been falling for 36 hours straight, the kind of relentless December storm that buried fence posts and erased roads and made the whole world feel like it was holding its breath. Inside, Lily hardly moved through rooms that had grown too quiet. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds, the same eyes her father had carried into war and never brought home. She wore her grandmother's gray cardigan, the sleeves rolled up 3 times and still hanging past her fingertips, the wool smelling faintly of lavender soap and the cinnamon tea Grandma Rosemary used to drink every morning at 5:30, without fail for as long as Lily could remember. But Grandma Rosemary had been gone for 4 days now. The funeral had been small. 6 people in folding chairs at Morrison's funeral home, their voices swallowed by too much empty space. Mrs. Talbot from the church had held Lily's hand during the service and said something about God's plan, but Lily had stopped listening because God's plan seemed to involve taking away everyone she loved one by one until the house felt like a museum dedicated to absence. Her father first. Sergeant Nathan Hartley killed in a training accident at Fort Bragg 6 years ago when Lily was barely old enough to remember the sound of his laugh. Then her mother Maggie, 3 months later, the cancer spreading faster than the doctors had predicted, faster than hope could keep up with. Lily remembered the hospital smell. She remembered her mother's hand thin and cold. She remembered the way the machines beeped steady and heartless until they didn't beep anymore. She'd spent 3 years after that in foster care, while Grandma Rosemary fought through paperwork and court dates in a system that moved like molasses in January. By the time Lily came to live at the farmhouse, she was 5 years old and had learned that loving people meant preparing to lose them. Now it was just her. The electricity had gone out the night before around 6 o'clock. Lines somewhere between the house and town finally surrendering to the weight of ice and snow. Lily had found candles in the kitchen drawer, the emergency kind Grandma kept for hurricanes, and she'd lit 3 of them, setting them on saucers around the living room like little campfires against the dark. The wood stove in the corner was supposed to keep the house warm, but Lily didn't know how to work it properly. She'd tried adding logs the way she'd seen Grandma do it, opening the iron door and pushing the wood inside. But the pieces were too big and she couldn't split them. The hatchet hung on a nail in the mudroom, its blade catching the candlelight, but Grandma had been very clear about that rule. Never touch the hatchet alone, Lily girl. That's a tool for grown hands, not yours. So the fire burned low and weak, giving off more smoke than heat, and Lily had taken to sleeping in the rocking chair beside it, wrapped in every quilt she could carry down from the bedrooms upstairs. She'd piled them on like layers of armor, trying to trap whatever warmth her small body could make, but the cold still crept in through the cracks, around the windows, and the gaps beneath the doors. She was hungry, but there wasn't much left to eat. 1 can of chicken noodle soup, the store brand kind, with the label half peeled off. A sleeve of saltine crackers. A jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 spoonfuls left at the bottom. Grandma's Social Security check had come 2 days before she died, but it was still sitting on the kitchen table in its envelope, untouched, because Lily didn't know what to do with it. The bills sat there 2 stacked in a neat pile the way Grandma always kept them, and on top of the pile was a letter in a red envelope. Lily had opened it once just to see. The words were too big, too official, but she understood enough. Something about property taxes. Something about $8,200. Something about 40 days to pay, or the house would be taken. She'd folded the letter back up and slid it into the envelope and tried not to think about what happened to little girls who lost their houses on top of losing everything else. Outside, the wind howled like something alive and furious, throwing snow against the windows and waves piling it high against the porch railing until the whole world beyond the glass looked like one endless white wall. Lily had tried calling Mrs. Talbot that morning, using the landline because her grandmother's old rotary phone didn't need electricity, but the line had been dead. No dial tone, just silence. Her tablet had died yesterday. No way to charge it, no way to call for help. So she waited. She rocked in Grandma's chair, the wood creaking beneath her in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. And she held the photograph she'd carried downstairs the night before. It was her favorite one, kept in a silver frame on the mantel. Her father in his uniform standing beside a dusty military truck somewhere in Afghanistan, his arm around another soldier. Both of them smiling, squinting against the sun. Her father's smile was the kind that made his whole face change, the kind that made you want to smile back, even if you didn't know why. Lily had been looking at that photograph a lot lately. She'd whisper to it sometimes when the house felt too empty and the silence pressed down like a weight on her chest. "I'm trying, Daddy," she'd say. "I'm trying to be brave like you." But the truth was she didn't feel brave. She felt small and cold and more alone than she'd ever been in her entire 8 years of life. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters, and Lily pulled the quilts tighter around her shoulders. The candles flickered. The stove gave a weak cough, the flame inside dancing low. She thought about adding more wood, but her arms were tired and the room was so cold that even getting up felt like too much effort. She was drifting somewhere between sleep and waking, her head tipped back against the chair, when she heard it. A sound. Not the wind, not the groan of old wood settling. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the front door. Lily's eyes snapped open, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just sat there frozen beneath the quilts, staring at the door as if it might answer the question pounding through her mind. Who would be out there? Who could be out there in a storm like this, in the middle of nowhere? At a house where nobody lived except one little girl who didn't matter to anyone anymore. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Then a voice rough and deep, muffled by the wood and the wind. "Ma'am, we don't want trouble. One of our men is freezing out here. We just need shelter till morning." Lily's breath caught. Her grandmother's voice rose up in her memory clear as daylight, the way it always did when Lily was scared. "Never open your door to strangers, Lily girl. Never, not for anything." But then Grandma's voice continued softer this time, the way it had sounded that last night when she'd been lying in the hospital bed with the machines beeping and her hands so weak in Lily's. "Unless the storm outside is colder than the fear inside you." Lily slid out of the rocking chair, the quilts falling away, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She moved to the window on shaking legs, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, and she wiped a circle in the frost with the sleeve of the cardigan. Through the glass, she saw them. 7 men on the porch. They were massive, all of them broad-shouldered and dressed in black leather jackets crusted white with snow. Their motorcycles leaned in the driveway like sleeping beasts, half-buried chrome glinting dully beneath the ice. The men stood in a loose semicircle, their breath coming out in clouds, their faces shadowed beneath the brims of caps and the hoods of jackets. The one in front had a beard thick with ice, his hands shoved into his pockets, his head slightly bowed as if he were trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. On the back of his jacket, even through the snow, Lily could see a patch. A skull with wings, words stitched in white thread. Hell's Angels. She'd seen that patch before on the news in the background of stories her grandmother would turn off quickly with a shake of her head and a murmur about the world going to pieces. Lily's hand tightened on the edge of the curtain. Every warning she'd ever heard told her to run upstairs, hide under the bed, stay quiet until they went away. But then the man in front stepped aside just a little, and Lily saw the 7th man. He was sitting on the porch board, slumped against the railing, his whole body shaking so hard his teeth chattered loud enough that Lily could hear it through the glass. His gloves were pressed under his arms. His face was pale. His eyes were closed. He looked less like a monster and more like somebody's grandfather who'd been caught outside too long, who'd made a mistake and was paying for it with every shiver. Lily thought about her father. She thought about the stories Grandma used to tell about how Sergeant Nathan Hartley had been the kind of man who stopped to help strangers on the side of the road, who gave his coat to people who needed it more, who believed that being strong meant using that strength to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. A coat can scare you, sweetheart, Grandma had said once when Lily had pulled away from a homeless man outside the grocery store. But a heart is harder to see. Don't judge what you can't see. Lily's hand moved to the deadbolt before she could stop herself. She slid the chain free. She turned the knob. She opened the door just wide enough for the storm to rush in around her ankles, cold and sharp, and full of snow that stung her face. The man in front, tall, maybe late 40s, with a scar running through his left eyebrow, lowered himself slowly until his eyes were level with hers. His face was weathered, lined with years and hard winters, but his eyes were steady, calm, not cruel. "My name's Garrett Stryker," he said, his voice careful, like he was talking to a frightened animal. "Folks call me Raven. We'll stand right here if you say no, but one of ours is in bad shape. We won't come past the door unless you let us." Lily looked from his face to the shivering man behind him, then back into the house that had felt so empty. It hurt. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, but it came out. "You can come in, but boots off. This is my grandma's house." Something shifted in Raven's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Respect, maybe. "Yes, ma'am." He stood and turned to the others, his voice low and firm. "You heard her. Boots off, gentlemen. This is a home." Lily stepped back, her heart hammering, and watched as 7 men filed into the narrow entryway, their shoulders too wide for the space, their presence filling the house like a sudden flood. Snow slid from their jackets and melted on the braided rug, but none of them moved farther than the doorway. They balanced on one foot at a time, unlacing frozen boots with stiff fingers, setting them neatly against the wall in a row. The shivering man, silver-haired older, with kind eyes behind fog glasses, sank into the chair by the coat rack before his legs gave out. One of the others, a younger man with a flat-top haircut, helped wrap him in the quilt Lily pulled from the back of the couch. Raven stayed closest to the door, his hands at his sides, his gaze sweeping the room but not touching anything. "Are your folks upstairs?" he asked gently. Lily's fingers tightened around the edge of Grandma's cardigan. The only sounds were the wind pressing against the walls and the old clock ticking above the kitchen sink. "No," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "My parents are in heaven. Grandma Rosemary too now." The room went still. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence Lily had heard from adults at the funeral, the kind that made people look at their shoes and change the subject as fast as they could. This silence felt different, heavier, like each man had taken off his hat inside a church and bowed his head because it was the only thing left to do. Raven lowered his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her with something in his eyes that didn't match the scars on his knuckles or the leather on his back. "I'm sorry, Lily." She blinked, startled. "How did you know my name?" He pointed carefully toward the kitchen, where the refrigerator stood covered in crayon drawings held up by magnets shaped like farm animals. At the bottom of one, in big purple letters, it said Lily and Grandma Rosemary, Spring Picnic. Lily felt her cheeks warm. She'd forgotten that was there. The kitchen still looked almost like Grandma had just stepped into the next room. Her reading glasses sat beside the sugar bowl. Her flowered apron hung from a hook by the sink. A half-finished grocery list written in shaky blue ink lay on the counter. But the house had changed since the funeral. Rooms that used to smell like cinnamon toast and lavender soap now smelled like cold wood and unopened mail. The warmth was gone. The life was gone. All that was left were the pieces. Raven glanced toward the stove, his eyes narrowing slightly. "How long has that been burning low?" Lily shrugged, embarrassed. "I tried to add wood, but the pieces are too big. I'm not supposed to use the hatchet." "Good," Raven said, and there was approval in his voice. "That's a rule worth keeping." One of the other men, a lean, gray-haired man with a long ponytail and a face like weathered stone, knelt near the stove and examined the draft with the focus of someone reading a map. The others called him Preacher, though Lily didn't know why yet. "Pipe struggling," Preacher said quietly. "Winds pushing hard from the north. Drafts weak." Lily hugged the quilt tighter around the silver-haired man's shoulders and whispered almost ashamed, I only had one can of soup left. I was saving it for morning because the lady from child services said someone would come when the roads open. Raven's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. You've been here alone all this time. Since yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Talbot from down the road was supposed to check on me, but her truck got stuck before dark. She called before the phone died. Lily pointed to the cordless phone sitting useless in its cradle on the counter. The power went out and my tablet died too. I wasn't scared at first. She tried to say it bravely, but the last word trembled. Raven slowly removed his leather gloves and set them on the floor beside him, showing her his empty hands. Lily, you did something kind tonight. You might have saved my friend from getting much sicker. But I want you to remember something important. You don't open a door alone just because someone asks. You look, you listen, you call for help if you can, and you keep something solid between you and the stranger until you know it's safe. Lily frowned, confused by the lesson wrapped inside the thank you. But if I hadn't opened it, he could have frozen. Raven nodded toward the man wrapped in her quilt, the one called Grizzly. That's true, and that's why courage is hard. Real courage isn't forgetting danger. Real courage is caring while still being careful. The words settled over the little kitchen like another blanket, warm and heavy and true. Lily looked at the men again, not as shadows from the storm, but as tired travelers with red fingers and wet sleeves and grateful eyes. For the first time that night, the house felt less empty, though the blizzard still had its hands wrapped around the walls. Raven let the silence breathe before he moved again. He didn't cross into the kitchen. He didn't reach for Lily or the red-lettered envelope on the table or the family photographs lined along the wall. He simply turned to the men behind him and spoke in the same low, steady voice he'd used at the door. Doc, check Grizzly's temperature and keep him talking. Preacher, see what you can do about that stove without taking anything apart that belongs to Miss Lily. Kid, find towels, but ask first. The youngest of the group, a broad-shouldered man in his late 20s with snow still melting from his sleeves, looked toward Lily and waited. May I? He asked, pointing to a narrow cabinet beside the sink. Lily nodded, still not used to grown men asking permission inside a house most people treated like it was already empty. Kid took 2 towels, wiped the floor where their boots had dripped, then folded the wet ones into a neat square by the back door. The simple courtesy made Lily's eyes sting. Since Grandma had died, adults had spoken over her, around her, and about her, but almost never to her. These men looked frightening enough to stop traffic on a sunny day. Yet they treated her grandmother's little farmhouse like it mattered. Preacher knelt by the stove with a flashlight between his teeth, his ponytail tucked into the collar of his jacket. The others had told Lily he used to repair motorcycles behind a church in Ohio and could quote scripture, baseball statistics, and engine manuals with equal seriousness. He tapped the stovepipe once, then frowned. Draft's weak. Could be snow-packed high against the outside vent. Can it wait till morning? Raven asked. Preacher looked toward Lily, then toward the windows glazed white with ice. Not if the flame keeps starving like that. Lily's throat tightened. I thought it was just old. Grandma said the house had moods. Preacher smiled gently, the lines around his eyes deepening. Old houses do have moods, sweetheart, but they also have warning signs. Raven finally stepped farther inside, slow enough that Lily could move away if she wanted to. He stopped beside the refrigerator where photographs covered nearly every inch of the metal surface. Lily missing her 2 front teeth, Grandma Rosemary holding a pie, a young couple standing beside a blue pickup truck, and a soldier in desert camouflage, one arm around a smiling woman, his face sun-dark and strong. Raven stared at that last photograph for a little too long. His face changed so quickly Lily almost missed it. The hard lines around his eyes softened, then tightened again, as if some old memory had stepped out of the frame and touched him on the shoulder. That's my dad, Lily said quietly. Sergeant Nathan Hartley. He was in the Army. Raven swallowed. I can see that. Did you know him? The question came out before Lily could stop it, before she even knew she was going to ask. Raven looked down at her, and for the first time since he'd entered the house, the big biker seemed unsure of his own voice. Maybe, he said carefully. I knew a man named Hartley a long time ago. Good man. Brave in the quiet way, not the loud way. Lily studied him the way children who've lost too much become experts at hearing what adults don't say. Grandma said Daddy helped people even when nobody clapped for it. Raven nodded once, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. That sounds like the man I remember. From the chair by the wall, Grizzly gave a small laugh under the quilt. Raven doesn't say that about many people. Raven shot him a look, not angry, just private, and Grizzly went quiet again. Lily noticed everything. The nickname, the respect, the way the other men waited for Raven before doing anything important. She'd expected rough voices and heavy steps. Instead, she found rules. Not the kind printed on school posters, but the kind carried in the body. Don't frighten a child. Don't dirty a widow's floor. Don't touch what isn't yours. Don't let pride get in the way of keeping someone warm. Raven turned from the photograph and crouched near the table, leaving several feet between them. Lily, I need to ask you something, and you're not in trouble. Has anyone checked the chimney or the vent since the storm started? She shook her head. Grandma used to call Mr. Talbot for things like that. I don't know how. That's all right, you're 8. You're not supposed to know how to keep a farmhouse alive in a blizzard. The words were gentle, but they struck something deep in Lily's chest. She'd spent the whole day trying to be old enough to survive, old enough to ration soup, old enough to pile blankets under the doors, old enough not to cry when the dark came early. Hearing someone say she was allowed to be 8 made her lower lip tremble. Raven saw it and looked away just enough to give her privacy. Preacher returned from the mud room with his flashlight beam pointed at the floor. Back vents nearly buried. I can clear it from the porch if the wind lets me. Raven stood. I'll go with you. Lily stepped forward, her voice sharper than she intended. You can't. The storm's too bad. Raven looked back at her, the corner of his mouth lifting with the faintest warmth. That's why we go in pairs. He pulled on his gloves, then paused at the door. And that's another rule worth keeping. As the 2 men disappeared into the white roar outside, Lily stood with the quilt wrapped around her shoulders, watching their shapes move past the window. For the first time, she understood that being brave didn't always mean opening the door. Sometimes it meant letting the right people stand between you and the storm. The front door closed behind Raven and Preacher with a soft thud that sounded far too small for the storm waiting outside. Lily hurried to the window, but frost had already swallowed the glass again, leaving only blurred shadows moving through the white. The house seemed to hold its breath with her. In the kitchen, Doc sat beside Grizzly and kept 2 fingers lightly against the older man's wrist. Tell me the best burger you ever had, Doc said. Grizzly blinked under the quilt. Why? Because if you can complain about burger places, you can stay awake for me. Grizzly gave a weak smile. Tulsa, little place off Route 66. Greasy as sin and worth every mile. Lily looked over, surprised by the calm in Doc's voice. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't acting like the snow and darkness had won. He just kept Grizzly talking, kept the quilt tucked around him, kept one eye on the small travel thermometer he'd pulled from his saddlebag. Kid found a box of matches in the drawer and a stack of old newspapers tied with string. May I use these? He asked. Lily nodded. Grandma saved them for starting fires. She said yesterday's news could still do some good. Kid smiled at that, then began twisting the paper into tight knots the way Lily's grandmother used to do. The smell of cold leather, wet wool, and wood smoke filled the kitchen. It should have felt strange. Instead, it felt like the house was slowly remembering how to be lived in. Lily climbed onto a chair and opened the pantry. Inside were 2 sleeves of crackers, the jar of peanut butter with 3 spoonfuls left, 3 cans of green beans, the dented can of chicken noodle soup, and 1 small tin of cocoa. She stared at the shelves, shame rising hot in her face. There's not enough, she whispered. Kid turned. Enough for what? For guests. The word came out with all the seriousness Grandma Rosemary had taught her. Even when they'd had very little, Grandma had insisted that visitors got the good mugs and the first slice of pie. Kids' expressions softened. Miss Lily on the road, I've eaten gas station peanuts for dinner and called it a blessing. Crackers sound like a feast tonight. Doc nodded without looking away from Grizzly. Peanut butter's got protein. That's useful food. Nobody laughed. Nobody made her feel poor. So Lily spread peanut butter on crackers with a butter knife, placing them carefully on a chipped blue plate. She poured water into jelly glasses and apologized because there was no ice, which made Grizzly chuckle for real this time. Sweetheart, I've got enough ice in my beer to cool a picnic. The laugh moved through the room like a match catching small but bright. When Raven and Preacher came back in, they brought half the storm with them. Snow clung to their shoulders and melted down their sleeves, but Preacher's eyes were relieved. Vents clear for now. Chimney cap had snow packed around it. We opened a path. Raven shut the door firmly and leaned his back against it for one breath longer than he needed. Lily noticed the red cold across his cheeks, the way his gloved hands flexed as a feeling returned to his fingers. He saw the plate on the table. You made food. Only crackers, Lily said quietly. No. Raven removed his gloves and looked at the careful row she'd feed each cracker matched with another like tiny sandwiches. You made welcome. There's a difference. Lily looked down quickly, but not before he saw her eyes shine. Preacher fed the stove with smaller pieces split from a bundle on the porch, and within minutes the flame steadied. No longer gasping in the draft, warmth began to gather around their ankles, slow but real. Raven walked the downstairs rooms with Lily beside him, not touching anything without asking. In the parlor, he paused at Grandma Rosemary's rocking chair. In the hallway, he checked the window latches. Near the stairs, he found a towel stuffed beneath the door to block the cold. You did this. Lily nodded. I saw Grandma do it. Smart. The word landed in her like a medal. Not cute, not poor thing, not bless her heart. Smart. Back in the kitchen, Preacher tested the air near the stove and frowned thoughtfully, then opened the damper a little wider. We'll need to keep watch on this all night. Raven nodded. We take turns. No one sleeps too deep. Lily hugged the gray cardigan tighter. You don't have to stay awake for me. Raven crouched again, careful and steady, his shadow large across the floor, but his voice gentle enough to rest in. Lily, listen to me. Adults are supposed to stay awake so children can sleep. Somewhere along the line, too many people forgot that. We're not going to. The old clock ticked above the sink. The storm kept pressing its white hands against the windows. But Lily felt something inside her loosen, something she'd been holding since the funeral, since the first night the house went quiet, since every adult with a clipboard had spoken kindly but left anyway. She carried the plate of crackers to the table, and the bikers accepted them like they'd been served Thanksgiving dinner. Outside, the blizzard buried the road deeper by the minute. Inside, a little girl, 7 stranded riders in one fading farmhouse, began to make a circle of warmth against the dark. The first warning wasn't a sound. It was the absence of one. The stove, which had been breathing steadily only minutes before, suddenly gave a soft, uneven flutter, and the flame behind the iron door dipped low, as if an invisible hand had pressed down on it. Preacher noticed first. His head turned slightly, his smile fading, while Lily was handing Grizzly another cracker. Raven, he said, calm but sharp enough to change the room. Raven was already standing. Everyone away from the stove. Nobody argued. Doc helped Grizzly to his feet and guided him toward the parlor couch. Kid opened the kitchen window 2 inches, letting a blade of bitter air slice through the warmth they'd worked so hard to build. Lily hugged herself, confused and frightened. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, Preacher said, reaching for his flashlight. Old houses sometimes whisper before they shout. Raven turned to Lily and lowered his voice. I need you to come with me into the parlor. Slow steps, no rushing. His calm made her even more afraid because it was the kind of calm adults used when something mattered. As they moved away from the kitchen, Doc pulled a small carbon monoxide alarm from his saddlebag, the kind he carried for long winter rides in cheap roadside cabins. He pressed the test button, then set it near the doorway. A minute later, the little device began to chirp. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin electronic warning that made every man in the house go still. Lily stared at it. "What is that?" Raven crouched beside her, blocking the kitchen from her view with his broad shoulders. "It means the stove isn't venting right. The air could make people sick if we ignore it." Lily's face went pale. "I slept beside it last night." For one heartbeat, the room seemed to tilt. Raven didn't let his expression break. He only nodded as if she'd given him useful information instead of a sentence that squeezed his chest. "Then I'm very glad we're here tonight." Preacher and Kid opened another window, then used towels to control the draft so the house would clear without freezing everyone at once. Doc checked Lily's pulse, asked if her head hurt, if she felt dizzy, if her stomach felt strange. She answered in a tiny voice that she'd been sleepy all afternoon, but thought it was because she'd cried too much after the funeral. Raven looked toward the stove, then toward the little girl wrapped in her grandmother's sweater, and the truth settled over him, colder than the storm. She'd opened the door to save them, but they'd walked in just in time to save her from a danger she couldn't see, smell, or understand. Outside, the wind battered the farmhouse, hard enough to rattle the plates in the cabinet. Inside, the bikers moved with careful purpose. No shouting, no panic. Just jobs passed from one man to another like a practiced chain. Preacher shut the stove down completely. Kid cleared a path through the mudroom to the back porch. Doc found extra blankets and kept Grizzly and Lily seated away from the kitchen. Raven went to his motorcycle, fighting through snow that came up past his knees to retrieve a battery-powered emergency radio from his saddlebag. When he returned, his beard was white again, and his hands were stiff with cold, but the radio crackled to life on the table. He adjusted the dial until a county emergency channel broke through the static. "This is Garrett Stryker, stranded at the Hartley farmhouse off County Road 12. He said, each word clear and measured. "We have one minor child in the residence. Possible carbon monoxide exposure. No working phone, limited heat, roads blocked by snow. We need a welfare check and medical evaluation when access opens." Lily's eyes filled with panic. "Minor child means me." Raven set the radio down and turned to her. "Yes, they'll take me away." Her voice cracked on the last word. "They said someone would come after the storm. They said I can't stay here alone. If they take me, I'll lose Grandma's house. I'll lose everything." The fear in her face was bigger than the blizzard, bigger than the men in leather, bigger than the official voices waiting somewhere beyond the static. Raven pulled a chair across from her, turned it backward, and sat so he wouldn't tower over her. Lily listened carefully. "Being safe comes first. Not the house, not the papers on the table. You. After that, we fight for what's right, but we fight the right way." She wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "What if the right way is too slow?" Raven looked at the bank envelope, at the photographs, at the old rocking chair that still held the shape of a woman who'd loved this child fiercely. "Then we bring more people to stand with you while it moves." The radio crackled again, a dispatcher answering through the storm, asking for names, location, symptoms, whether the child was conscious and warm. Raven answered every question honestly. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't hide. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Lily listened, trembling under the quilt, as the scariest man she'd ever opened her door to became the first adult all week who told the whole truth and stayed anyway. The dispatcher's voice faded back into static, leaving the farmhouse with a new kind of quiet. The danger had been named. The windows had been cracked open. The stove had been made safe. And yet Lily still sat rigid beneath the quilt, as if one wrong breath might cause the whole night to fall apart. Raven watched her from across the table. He'd seen that look before in grown men who'd carried too much for too long. But it felt different on a child's face. Children were supposed to worry about spelling tests and loose teeth and whether pancakes could count as dinner. They weren't supposed to worry about bank letters, blocked roads, and whether a house could be lost while they were sleeping. Preacher kept watch near the kitchen doorway with the carbon monoxide alarm beside him, its green light steady now that the air had cleared. Doc had Grizzly resting in the parlor with his feet up and a blanket tucked under his chin. Kid was at the window clearing frost from the glass every few minutes to check the storm. Raven reached into the inside pocket of his leather vest and pulled out a worn brown wallet. He hesitated before opening it because some memories had edges even after years of being carried close to the heart. "Lily," he said softly, "I need to show you something." She looked up tired but listening. Raven removed a folded photograph. Its corners softened from age and handling. The picture showed a row of soldiers standing beneath a wide desert sky, dusty and tired, and smiling in the stubborn way people smile when they're trying to believe tomorrow will be easier. Raven was younger in the photo, his beard still dark, his eyes less guarded. Beside him stood a man with the same kind smile Lily had seen in the frame on the refrigerator. She slid off the chair and came closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "That's Daddy," she whispered. Raven nodded. "Sergeant Nathan Hartley. We served together for part of a deployment in Afghanistan. I knew him as Nate. Everybody had a short name over there." Lily touched the edge of the photo, careful not to bend it. "Grandma said he made people feel safe." Raven looked at the image for a long moment. He did. Not because he was the loudest, he wasn't. Not because he acted fearless. Nobody's fearless all the time. Your father was the kind of man who noticed when somebody else was scared and stood close enough that they didn't have to be scared alone. Lily's eyes stayed on the photograph. "Did he talk about me?" Raven drew a slow breath. He talked about a baby girl with bright eyes and a laugh that made him forget how far he was from home. He had a little picture taped inside his footlocker. He said when he got back, he was going to build you a tree swing and teach you how to spot the Big Dipper. Lily blinked fast. "He did build the swing. It broke last summer." Then he kept his promise. Raven's voice roughened at the edges, and he looked away toward the dark window. For years, he'd carried the memory of Nathan Hartley as a private debt, the kind men kept sealed because opening it meant admitting how much had been lost. Nathan had once helped him through a night when Raven's own courage had nearly run empty. Not with speeches, not with heroics, but by sitting beside him on a dusty concrete floor and saying, "You don't have to be made of stone to be worth something." Raven had never forgotten those words, though he'd spent most of his life pretending he had. Lily studied his face with the solemn attention of a child who understood grief better than any child should. "Were you his friend?" Raven answered carefully because children deserved honest words. "I wasn't as good a friend as I wish I'd been, but he was good to me when I needed it." From the parlor, Grizzly coughed softly, then settled again. The wind pushed snow against the window in silver sheets. Lily looked down at the photograph, then at the small metal bracelet on her wrist, the one her father had worn before it became hers. "After Daddy died, Grandma told me some people leave love behind like lanterns. You find them later when it gets dark." Raven felt something in his chest give way, not breaking exactly, but opening. "Your grandma was a wise woman." Lily's mouth curved just a little. "She would have liked that you took your boots off." A quiet laugh moved through Raven before he could stop it. "Then I'm glad we showed manners." Lily handed the photograph back, but Raven shook his head. "Keep it for tonight. Tomorrow we'll make a copy, and you can keep that one too." Her fingers closed around it as though it were warm. For the first time since the radio call, she leaned back against the chair and let the quilt cover her shoulders instead of clutching it like armor. "Mr. Raven." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you think my dad knew I was going to be okay?" Raven looked at the men in the room, at the storm outside, at the little girl who'd opened a door out of fear and kindness and somehow brought his past back to him. "I think your dad spent his whole life helping people find their way home," he said. "And tonight, maybe he helped us find yours." By 3:17 in the morning, the storm began to change its voice. It no longer screamed against the farmhouse in wild bursts, but pressed against it with a heavy, stubborn weight, piling snow higher against the porch rail and sealing County Road 12 beneath a smooth white silence. The emergency radio crackled every few minutes with voices from the outside world. Plow crews delayed near Miller's Bridge, a deputy stuck behind a fallen pine, an ambulance waiting at the highway turnout until the road could be cleared. Lily listened to each update with the photograph of her father resting in her lap. Every official word sounded polite, careful, and far away. Then a new voice came through the radio, a woman from County Child Services asking for confirmation that the child was safe, awake, and supervised. Raven answered with steady respect, giving his full name, the number of adults present, Lily's condition, the carbon monoxide warning, and the fact that they were keeping windows cracked until help arrived. The woman thanked him, then said Lily would be placed in emergency care once the road opened, pending a review of her living situation. Lily's fingers curled around the edge of the photograph. Emergency care means foster care, she whispered. Raven didn't pretend not to hear. He set the radio down and looked at her with the kind of honesty that didn't hide behind soft words. It might mean a safe place while adults figure out the next right step. But I have a home. Her voice was small, but the hurt in it filled the kitchen. It's just cold right now. Preacher looked away toward the stove, his jaw working silently. Kid rubbed both hands over his face. Doc kept his eyes on the floor as if he was trying not to let anger make decisions for him home. Raven knew that feeling too well. Men like them had spent years being judged by jackets, engines, rumors, and old mistakes. It would have been easy to growl into the radio, to promise things no one had the legal right to promise, to turn the room into a battle against every person with a clipboard. But Lily didn't need a louder kind of chaos. She needed adults who could stand firm without losing control. Raven reached for the red-lettered bank envelope on the table. "May I read this?" Lily nodded after a moment. He opened it carefully, smoothing the paper under the lantern light. Past due property taxes, medical bills tied to Rosemary Hartley's final months. A pending notice that the house could be sealed if no responsible adult came forward. Not cruelty exactly, something colder. A system moving down a list without seeing the child at the end of it. "We're not solving this by scaring a clerk," Raven said more to the room than to Lily. Grizzly, still wrapped in quilts on the parlor couch, lifted his head. "Nobody said anything about scaring a clerk." Raven gave him a look. "I know how your eyebrows think." Despite herself, Lily almost smiled. Preacher came to the table. "I know a veterans legal aid office in Burlington. They helped my brother with benefits. They've got emergency contacts." Doc added, "I know a nurse who volunteers with county services. She can explain what they need to document the house as temporarily safe." Kid lifted his phone, though it had no signal. "When we get even one bar, I can reach the chapter. Trucks, generators, food carpenters. Half the men owe Raven a favor, and the other half owe me $20. Preacher cleared his throat, his voice quieter than before. "The property tax is $8,200. Even with the chapter's help, we're going to be short." Raven stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. For a long moment, he stared out at the white darkness, at the storm that had brought them here, at the motorcycles buried beneath snow in the driveway. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "My Harley's worth $15,000, clean title. I can get a loan against it by Monday." The room went silent. It was the kind of silence that came when people realized something they'd assumed was impossible had just become real. Lily's voice came out small and broken. "But that's your bike. You've had it for 20 years, Raven said, turning to face her. His eyes were clear, no hesitation in them. "Your dad had his whole life ahead of him when he pulled me out of that Humvee in Kandahar. Lost his hearing in one ear doing it. Never complained once, never asked for a medal, never even told his family what he'd done." He crouched down to her level the way he'd done at the door hours before. "A bike's just metal and chrome, Lily. You're your daddy's daughter. And that makes you worth more than anything I own. Lily's eyes filled with tears that spilled over before she could stop them. I can't let you do that. Raven's expression softened, but his voice stayed firm. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing. Just like you chose to open that door tonight. You could have stayed safe behind it. You could have let us freeze. But you didn't. Because somewhere inside you, there's a piece of your father, and he taught you that the right thing is still the right thing, even when it's hard. He stood and looked around the room at the other men. We do this clean. We document everything. We call the right people. We tell the truth. We don't turn this child into a spectacle, and we don't make promises the law hasn't caught up to yet. Lily stared at him, her small hands gripping the photograph so tightly it bent at the edges. Why would you help me this much? The question stopped the room. Raven looked at Nathan Hartley's photograph in her hands, then at the little girl sitting beneath a quilt too large for her shoulders, and when he answered, his voice carried the weight of a promise that had traveled across years and miles in the space between life and death. Because help that disappears by morning isn't enough, he said, and because your father once reminded me that being strong isn't about making people afraid. It's about making the frightened feel less alone. The radio hissed again, asking all stranded residents to conserve heat and wait for morning. Outside, the road was still buried, the town still sleeping behind walls of snow, the official help still miles away. Inside, Raven pulled a small notebook from his vest and began writing names, numbers, needs, and next steps. Preacher checked the air, Doc checked Lily, Kid checked the windows. Grizzly stayed awake and told her about the best sunrise he'd ever seen over the Green Mountains, the way the light had come through the clouds, like a promise the world was making to start over. No one called it a plan to save her home. Not yet. But around that kitchen table in the dim lantern glow, Lily watched a different kind of rescue begin. One made not of noise or force, but of patience, proof, and people willing to remain after the storm passed. Morning didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, first as a thin gray line behind the curtains, then as a pale wash of light across the kitchen floor, turning the snow outside from black shadow to silver. Lily had fallen asleep in the rocking chair sometime before dawn, with her father's photograph tucked against her chest and Grandma Rosemary's quilt pulled to her chin. When she opened her eyes, the house was quieter than it had been all night. The wind had dropped. The carbon monoxide alarm sat silent on the table. The cracked windows breathed clean, cold air into rooms that no longer felt like they were holding their breath. For one soft second, Lily thought maybe the whole thing had been a dream. The stranded riders, the emergency radio, Raven's careful voice telling the truth into the storm. The promise about the motorcycle that had carried him for 20 years, the promise he'd made without being asked. Then she heard it, a low rumble far beyond the front porch. Not thunder, not wind, engines, many engines. Lily sat up so fast the photograph slid into her lap. Raven was standing at the window, one hand holding the curtain aside, his face unreadable in the morning light. Preacher stood beside him with a mug of weak instant coffee he'd somehow made on a camping burner. Doc was already packing his medical kit. Kid opened the front door and froze with his hand on the knob. Raven, he said softly, you might want to see this. Lily slipped down from the chair and padded across the cold floor. Raven stepped aside so she could look out first. At the edge of the cleared road beyond the snowbanks, piled nearly 4 feet high by the county plow that had come through just after dawn, motorcycles stood in long, dark rows, their chrome shining under frost. Behind them were pickup trucks, a tow rig, 2 vans, and a flatbed loaded with lumber tarps, and a new generator still strapped in its box. Men and women in winter coats moved carefully through the snow, carrying grocery bags, toolboxes, blankets, fuel cans, and plastic bins labeled with tape. Some wore leather vests under their parkas. Others wore volunteer fire department jackets, church caps, Veterans Association patches, or plain work gloves. They weren't shouting. They weren't crowding the house. They waited at the fence line as if the little farmhouse were a place that deserved permission before entering. Lily's mouth opened, but no words came. Raven's voice was quiet beside her and thought, I made a few calls when the signal came back around 4 this morning. That's more than a few, Preacher muttered, but there was something like pride in his voice. A woman near the gate lifted a clipboard and waved. County Nurse Doc said, reading the badge through the glass even from this distance. Good, that'll help with the documentation. A white county vehicle pulled up slowly behind the trucks, followed by a sheriff's cruiser with its lights off, moving respectfully instead of urgently, as if the people inside understood this wasn't an emergency anymore, but something quieter, something that needed gentle hands. Lily stiffened. Raven noticed before she spoke. Remember what I said last night? Safety first, then the right fight the right way. These people aren't here to take anything from you. They're here to make sure you're okay. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, but he didn't let anyone rush in. He spoke with the nurse first, her breath coming out in clouds as she nodded and made notes on her clipboard. Then the deputy, a young man who looked cold but patient. Then a woman from Child Services, wrapped in a green winter coat, her face serious but not unkind. Lily watched him point to the stovepipe, to the carbon monoxide alarm still sitting on the kitchen table, to the list of names and phone numbers he'd written in his notebook during the night, to the bags of supplies waiting outside in the trucks. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't use his size like a threat. He used facts like boards in a bridge building, a path from fear to safety, one careful word at a time. The nurse came in first, stamping snow from her boots just inside the door before Doc handed her a towel. She checked Lily with warm hands and kind questions, asking about headaches and dizziness and whether she'd eaten anything this morning. Doc stood back answering only when asked, letting the official process unfold without interference. The child services woman came in next. She knelt instead of looming and looked Lily in the eye when she spoke. My name is Mrs. Evelyn Crane, she said. Lily, my job is to make sure you're safe and cared for. But I want you to know something important. I'm not here to erase your grandmother or pretend this house doesn't matter. I'm here to help figure out what happens next, and I promise you'll have a voice in that. That sentence made Lily look at her for the first time, really look, and see something in Mrs. Crane's face that reminded her of Grandma Rosemary. Not the features, but the way she held herself, like someone who understood that kindness and rules didn't have to be enemies. Outside, the work began with surprising order. Preacher led two men with toolboxes toward the chimney, pointing and explaining, while they nodded and took notes. Kid helped unload the generator, a bright yellow Honda that hummed to life on the third pole, steady and strong. A retired electrician with a tool belt and kind eyes inspected the electrical panel in the basement, making a list of what was safe and what needed replacing. A woman from the Baptist church brought oatmeal, still warm in a thermos, apples that looked like they'd been polished, in a container of hot chocolate that smelled like Christmas. Someone shoveled a path to the barn. Someone else placed a small, handwritten sign near the porch that read, "Please ask before entering." We're working. Raven had made that rule and everyone followed it. By 8:30, a local news van slowed near the road camera visible through the windshield. Raven walked down the path before the crew could step out of the vehicle. Lily couldn't hear every word through the window, but she saw him shake his head, saw him point back toward the house, and then toward the road leading away, saw the cameraman lower his equipment, and the reporter nod slowly before getting back in the van. Later, Kid told her what Raven had said. You can report that a community helped a child. You don't need to put her face on television to prove it happened. You don't need her name. You don't need her story. What you need is to understand that sometimes people do the right thing without needing an audience. Lily stood behind the curtain with the mug of hot chocolate warming both hands, watching strangers become neighbors in front of her eyes. The shocking thing wasn't the motorcycles or the leather or the number of people filling the snowy yard. The shocking thing was how gentle they were with everything that hurt. They touched Grandma Rosemary's porch rail like it was something precious. They carried food like an offering to an altar. They spoke softly when they said Lily's name the way people speak in hospitals and libraries and places where quiet matters. For the first time since the funeral, the world outside her door didn't feel like it had come to take something away. It had come engine by engine, hand by hand, to help her keep what love had left behind. By noon, the Hartley farmhouse no longer looked abandoned to winter. A new generator hummed behind the shed, steady as a heartbeat powering lights in the refrigerator and a space heater that took the edge off the cold. The chimney had been cleared, the faulty stovepipe tagged with red tape, and a note that said, "Replace before use." And a borrowed electric heater sat in the kitchen, glowing orange and warm. The county nurse had checked Lily twice, taking her temperature and blood pressure, and asking questions about the last few days. She declared Lily tired, understandably shaken, and mildly dehydrated, but fundamentally safe. No lasting effects from the carbon monoxide, no signs of hypothermia or malnutrition, just a child who'd survived something she shouldn't have had to survive alone. Mrs. Evelyn Crane sat at Grandma Rosemary's table with Raven the deputy and a legal aid attorney who'd driven in behind the second plow, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd brought a briefcase full of forms in a manner that suggested she didn't suffer fools or bureaucratic nonsense. No one spoke over Lily. That mattered more than she knew how to explain. They explained each paper before asking anyone to sign anything. They told her what would happen that day, what might happen next week, and what questions still needed answers. They treated her like someone whose opinion mattered, not like a problem to be solved or a case to be closed. Then just after 1 o'clock, a blue Subaru came slowly up the clear drive and stopped crooked beside the snowbank, as if the driver had been in too much of a hurry to park straight. A woman stumbled out before the engine was fully quiet, red-haired coat half-buttoned, tears already shining on her face. "Lily," she called, her voice breaking on the name. Lily knew that voice from birthday calls that always came a day late from Christmas cards, with $5 bills tucked inside from the stories Grandma Rosemary told when she thought Lily was asleep. Stories about Nathan's little sister, who'd lost her way after he died but was trying, always trying to find it again. Aunt Stella. The woman dropped to her knees in the snow as Lily ran into her arms, and Stella Hartley held her like someone trying to close a distance that should never have grown so wide. She kept saying it over and over like a prayer or a promise or both. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. I came as soon as they found me. I'm here now. I'm here." Later, after Stella had been checked by the nurse and given coffee by Preacher, and wrapped in a blanket by Doc because she was shaking, and it wasn't entirely from the cold, the adults learned the truth in pieces. Grandma Rosemary had tried to reach Stella from the hospital, but old phone numbers that had been disconnected, unpaid bills that had interrupted service, and a letter that had been sent to an address Stella no longer lived at had turned a family emergency into a silence nobody meant to create. Stella wasn't rich. She taught second grade in a small town in New Hampshire and lived in a one-bedroom apartment with more books than furniture, more student debt than savings, and a life she was still trying to rebuild after years of running from grief she hadn't known how to carry. But she was family. She was willing. And she'd already called her principal from a gas station at 4 in the morning to request emergency leave, had already emptied her meager checking account to put gas in the Subaru, had already driven through a blizzard's aftermath on roads that were barely passable, because someone had called her and said, "Your niece needs you." Mrs. Crane didn't wave a magic wand. She made calls, checked records, spoke with the attorney, and ran background checks that came back clean. She arranged a temporary kinship placement while the court reviewed the petition for permanent guardianship. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't instant. It would require weekly check-ins and monthly court reviews and 100 small proofs that Stella could provide a stable home. But it was real and it was right, and it was more than Lily had dared to hope for when she'd woken up that morning. By late afternoon, the motorcycles began leaving one by one, their engines rolling softly down County Road 12, as if even the machines knew not to disturb what had been healed there. Raven stayed until the last truck was loaded and the last form was copied, until the generator was tested one more time and the emergency numbers were posted on the refrigerator, and Stella had been walked through everything she needed to know about the house, the bills, the court dates, and the people who'd promised to help. Lily found him on the porch, standing beside a new wooden sign Preacher had made from a scrap of clean pine salvaged from someone's workshop. The letters were simple, dark and careful, burned into the wood with a tool that left them permanent. Hartley House, no child stands alone. Lily held something behind her back, something she'd been thinking about all afternoon while the adults talked and made plans and rebuilt the walls around her world. Mr. Raven, he turned and she saw the tiredness in his face, the kind that came from staying awake all night and giving away something precious and not regretting it, even though it hurt. Yes, ma'am. She brought out Grandma Rosemary's gray scarf, the one with a small patch near the end, where the yarn had worn thin, the one that smelled like lavender and cinnamon, and all the mornings Lily had watched her grandmother wrap it around her neck before walking out to feed the chickens or check the mail or simply stand on the porch and look at the mountains. Grandma said good people should leave warmer than they came. Raven stared at the scarf as if she'd handed him something far too valuable for his rough hands, as if it were made of gold instead of wool of memory, instead of thread. Lily, that belongs to you. I know, she said, and her voice was sticky, now stronger than it had been the night before. That's why I can give it. Around them, the porch went quiet. Preacher, who'd been loading tools into his saddlebag, stopped and looked toward the road. Doc suddenly became very interested in checking the tightness of a strap he'd already checked twice. Raven took the scarf slowly, reverently, and wrapped it once around his neck. The gray wool looked strange against his black leather, soft against all those hard edges, gentle against the scars and tattoos, and the weathered face of a man who'd spent 20 years trying to pay back a debt he'd thought could never be repaid. His eyes shone, but he didn't hide them. He let Lily see. Your father would be proud of you, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly on the word proud. Lily shook her head, wise beyond her years, in the way children become when they've lost too much and learned that love is the only thing that lasts. I think he'd be proud of all of us. For a moment, nobody moved. Snow glittered across the fields like scattered diamonds. The repaired porch rail caught the pale winter sun. Inside the house, Stella was making soup from groceries strangers had brought, and Mrs. Crane was laughing softly at something kids said about never being trusted near a can opener, and the old clock was ticking above the kitchen sink like a heart that had remembered how to beat. The farmhouse still needed work. The bills still needed sorting. Grief still sat in the rooms where Grandma Rosemary had once sung while washing dishes still waited in the corners. Where Nathan Hartley's photograph hung, still lived in the empty chair at the table. But grief was no longer the only thing living there. There was a plan on the table wood stacked by the Dora family under the roof, and a line of tire tracks in the snow proving that help had come and left carefully without taking Lily's dignity with it. Raven stepped down from the porch and started his Harley. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, a sound he'd heard thousands of times over 20 years. But this time it sounded different. Not like an ending, but like a promise being kept. Before he pulled away, he looked back once. Lily stood beside Stella beneath the new sign, one small hand lifted in goodbye, the other held tight in her aunt's grip. Raven touched the gray scarf at his throat, then placed his gloved hand over his heart in a gesture that was half salute, half prayer. He'd ridden into that storm thinking he was only looking for shelter from the cold. By morning, he'd found something infinitely more valuable, a promise older than grief and stronger than fear. The knowledge that Nathan Hartley's sacrifice in a desert halfway around the world had rippled forward through the years to save his daughter in a snowstorm in Vermont. When people choose to see one another clearly, when they choose kindness over fear and presence over absence, even the coldest world can become a home. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book. Lily had been too afraid to open, afraid of what the story might say, afraid it would end badly, like all the other stories in her life. But this one didn't end. It kept going. Winter gave way to early spring in the slow, stubborn way it always did in Vermont, the snow retreating inch by inch, leaving behind brown grass and patches of mud, and the first brave crocuses pushing through the cold ground near the mailbox, like purple flags declaring victory over the dark. The farmhouse, which had felt like a tomb in December, began to breathe again. Stella had kept her word in 100 small ways that added up to something big. She'd moved into the guest room the week after the storm, sleeping on a narrow bed with a quilt Grandma Rosemary had sewn 30 years before, the stitches still tight, the fabric still holding. She contacted her school in New Hampshire, arranged a leave of absence that turned into a resignation, and found work as a substitute teacher at Lily's elementary school 3 days a week. The pay wasn't much, barely enough really, but combined with what remained of Rosemary's savings in the Veterans Fund contribution that had covered the property tax and the money from the church collection that nobody talked about, but everyone knew about, it was enough to keep the lights on and food in the pantry and hope alive in the rooms that had almost forgotten what hope felt like. The provisional custody agreement had been strict, the kind of strict that came with weekly check-ins with Mrs. Crane, monthly reviews with the family, court mandatory counseling sessions for both Stella and Lily to ensure the transition was healthy, and a thick folder of requirements that had to be met before the word temporary could be removed from the arrangement. But Stella had met every requirement without complaint, showing up early to appointments, keeping detailed records of expenses and meals and bedtimes, proving with each small action that she wasn't running anymore, that she'd finally stopped being afraid of the grief that had chased her away from her family and learned to carry it instead. Lily watched her aunt carefully those first weeks, the way children watch adults. They're not sure they can trust yet, looking for signs of weakness or dishonesty or the kind of promises that break under pressure. She noticed that Stella's hands shook sometimes when she poured coffee in the morning, the mug rattling against the counter before she steadied it. She noticed the way Stella's voice got quiet and distant when anyone mentioned Nathan, as if saying his name out loud might crack something inside her that she'd worked hard to keep whole. She noticed the night Stella stayed up late at the kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed, staring at bills and legal documents with red-rimmed eyes, doing math on scratch paper, making lists of things they needed and things they could do without. But she also noticed other things. The way Stella learned to braid Lily's hair clumsy, at first pulling too tight or leaving pieces out, but determined to get it right. Watching YouTube videos on her phone and practicing until the braids looked like something Grandma Rosemary might have done. The way she sang while washing dishes, old songs Lily half remembered from when her mother was alive, songs about sunshine and rivers and roads that led home. The way she never promised things she couldn't deliver, never said, "Everything will be fine," when the truth was more complicated than that, never lied to make Lily feel better. Because she understood that lies, even kind ones, were just another way of leaving. By February, Lily had stopped flinching when Stella reached for her hand in the grocery store or at school pickup. By March, she'd started calling her Aunt Stella instead of just Stella, and the word had felt right in her mouth, had felt like family. By April, the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee again, and the silence didn't feel quite so heavy, and there were new drawings on the refrigerator next to the old ones, pictures of two people instead of one, pictures with the word us written in crayon at the bottom. Raven had kept his promise, too, the way Lily had known he would. Every fourth Saturday, like clockwork, his Harley would come up the road just after 10 in the morning, the engines rumble announcing his arrival long before he reached the driveway, giving Lily time to run to the window and watch him pull in, still wearing Grandma Rosemary's gray scarf tucked into his jacket, even though the weather was warming up. He never stayed long, maybe 2 hours, sometimes 3, but in that time he fixed things. The loose board on the front steps that creaked underfoot, the screen door that wouldn't latch properly, letting flies in, the gutter that had come loose during a March rainstorm and was dumping water onto the porch instead of into the downspout. He brought his tools in a canvas bag worn smooth from years of use and worked quietly, declining Stella's offers of lunch, but accepting coffee and whatever cookies Lily had helped bake that week. Sometimes Preacher came with him or Doc or Kid, their motorcycles lined up in the driveway like old friends gathering for a reunion. They'd work alongside Raven without being asked, reinforcing the porch railing that had started to wobble, sealing drafts around the windows, with fresh caulk replacing the mailbox post, that had rotted through at the base and was leaning at a dangerous angle. They moved like men who understood that some debts couldn't be paid with money, only with presence, with showing up, with being the kind of reliable that children needed to see in order to believe the world wasn't entirely made of people who left. Lily would sit on the porch steps and watch them work, asking questions about tools and motorcycles, and what it was like to ride all the way to Canada in one day, which Raven said he had done twice, once in summer, and once in a snowstorm that had nearly killed him before he'd learned to respect the weather. He answered every question seriously, never talking down to her, never making her feel like her curiosity was a burden, or her questions were stupid, or her company was anything less than welcome. One Saturday in late March, he'd brought something wrapped in brown paper and twine, the package carried carefully in his saddlebag. "Found this at an estate sale last weekend," he said, handing it to Lily. "Thought it might fit the spot on your wall." Inside was a small wooden frame, simple and well made, and inside the frame was the photograph he'd shown her that first night, the one he'd carried in his wallet for 20 years. Nathan Hartley and Garrett Stryker, young and dusty and smiling beneath the Afghan Sun brothers in all but blood. But this time it had been professionally restored, the creases smoothed away, the colors brightened and corrected, the whole image brought back to life by someone who knew how to make old photographs new again. Lily had held it carefully, her throat tight with gratitude and something deeper, something that felt like being seen and remembered and chosen. "You said I could keep a copy." "I'm a man of my word," Raven said simply. She'd hung it in the living room that afternoon, right beside the photograph of her father in his dress uniform, the one where he looked so young and serious and full of a future he'd never get to live. Two versions of the same man. Two moments in a life cut too short, but also proof, undeniable proof, that her father had been loved by people who still remembered, who still carried him forward, who still honored his memory by taking care of the daughter he'd left behind. School had been hard at first, harder than Lily had expected. She'd missed 3 weeks during the storm, in its aftermath, and when she'd finally returned to class in mid-January, the other children had stared at her with the kind of wide-eyed curiosity that came from hearing rumors they didn't fully understand, stories that got bigger with each retelling. Some of them had seen the news coverage, despite Raven's best efforts to keep Lily's face off camera and her name out of the headlines. Small towns had long memories and loose lips and a way of turning private tragedies into public property. A girl named Emma had cornered her at recess during the second week back, her voice high with excitement and questions. "Is it true a biker gang saved your life? My mom said they were Hell's Angels and everything. Were you scared? Did they have guns?" Lily had thought about that for a moment, standing in the cold spring wind with her hands shoved into her coat pockets, feeling the weight of the question and all the assumptions hidden inside it. "They're not a gang," she'd said, finally her voice quiet but certain. "They're people who showed up when nobody else could. And no, I wasn't scared. Not of them." Emma had nodded like that made sense. Like maybe she'd been hoping for a scarier story but could respect the truth instead. And after that, the questions had stopped. Mrs. Halpern, Lily's third-grade teacher, had been patient with her in ways that mattered. She'd given Lily extra time on assignments without making a fuss about it, hadn't pushed when Lily didn't want to talk in class, and had quietly arranged for her to eat lunch in the art room on days when the cafeteria felt too loud and overwhelming, when the noise of 100 kids shouting and laughing felt like too much chaos after the quiet of the farmhouse. By April, Lily had stopped eating lunch alone. She'd made a friend, a quiet boy named Marcus, who liked to draw spaceships with impossible engines and alien worlds with purple skies, who didn't ask questions about her family or her past, or why she sometimes got that faraway look in her eyes during math class. They'd sit together at the art room table working on their projects in comfortable silence, and sometimes Lily would tell him about the things Raven was teaching her, how to change a tire, how to check oil, how to use a level to make sure a shelf was straight, and Marcus would tell her about the comic book he was writing, a story about a girl who could talk to stars, and it felt normal in a way Lily had almost forgotten things could feel. The legal process had moved slowly, the way legal processes always did when they involve courts and judges and systems that treated people like cases instead of like human beings with stories and hearts and hopes. Mrs. Crane had filed the necessary paperwork for permanent guardianship in February, a thick stack of forms that required signatures and notarizations, and letters from teachers and counselors and doctors all saying the same thing in slightly different words. Lily is safe. Lily is cared for. Lily is thriving as much as any child can thrive after losing everything twice. But the court calendar was backed up with other cases, other children, other families trying to piece themselves back together, and the hearing kept getting postponed. First to March, then to April, then to early May. Each delay pushing the temporary arrangement a little further into the future. Each postponement feeling like holding her breath underwater and wondering if she'd be allowed to surface before her lungs gave out. Stella tried to hide her worry, but Lily could see it in the small things in the way her aunt checked the mailbox twice a day, hoping for a letter that would finally set a date, in the way she answered the phone on the first ring, and her face would fall when it wasn't the attorney or the court clerk, in the way she kept every receipt and wrote down every expense in a spiral notebook with careful precision as if someone might demand an accounting at any moment. And she needed to prove she was spending the money right, doing everything right, being the kind of guardian a child deserved. What if they say no? Lily had asked one night in March, sitting at the kitchen table while Stella made dinner spaghetti with sauce from a jar because neither of them knew how to cook fancy, but they were learning together. Stella had set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her, and in that moment, Lily had seen something in her aunt's face that looked like steel wrapped in kindness. Then we appeal. And if that doesn't work, we appeal again. And we keep going until they understand that you belong here with me in this house and that nobody gets to break this family apart again. But what if we run out of time? Stella had knelt down so they were eye to eye, had taken Lily's hands in hers, and when she spoke, her voice was fierce with a promise that had teeth. Lily, I ran away from this family once after your dad died because I didn't think I deserved to be part of it anymore. I thought I'd failed him by not being there, by not being strong enough to carry the grief without falling apart. I'm not running again. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how many forms I have to fill out or how many court dates I have to sit through. I'm staying. You're stuck with me. Lily had hugged her then, quick and fierce, and Stella had held on like she was afraid to let go. And they'd stayed like that until the spaghetti water boiled over and they had to break apart, laughing, wiping tears, and turning down the stove and salvaging dinner together. The hearing was finally scheduled for May 15th, a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. The night before, Lily couldn't sleep, couldn't even pretend to sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around her, with its familiar creaks and saws, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. What if the judge didn't like Stella? What if they thought the farmhouse was too run down, too isolated, not suitable for raising a child? What if they looked at the peeling paint in the drafty windows in the kitchen that still had appliances from the 1980s and decided Lily would be better off somewhere else with people who had more money, more stability, more of whatever it was that made families legitimate in the eyes of the law? Around midnight, she heard a soft knock on her door, 3 gentle taps that barely made a sound. Can't sleep either, Stella asked, her voice gentle in the darkness. Lily shook her head, though Stella probably couldn't see her. Stella came in and sat on the edge of the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face tired but calm in the moonlight coming through the window. You want to know something your dad told me once? Lily nodded. We were teenagers. I was probably 16, he was 17. I was terrified about trying out for the school play. I wanted the lead role, but I was sure I'd mess up, sure everyone would laugh at me, sure I wasn't good enough and never would be. Stella smoothed the blanket over Lily's legs, a gesture that felt like comfort and connection, and all the things mothers did without thinking. And Nathan said to me, Stella, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the thing anyway, even when your knees are shaking and your voice is trembling and you're pretty sure you're going to fail. It's about showing up even when you want to run away. She paused and Lily could hear the smile in her voice, even though she couldn't quite see it. Tomorrow my knees are going to be shaking, but I'm going to walk into that courtroom anyway and I'm going to tell them the truth, that you're the bravest person I know, that this house is your home, not just a building, but the place where your grandmother loved you and your father's memory lives and your roots go deep, that I'm not perfect, but I love you and I'm not going anywhere. Lily reached for her aunt's hand in the darkness. What if it's not enough? Stella's grip tightened warm and strong. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together. The words settled over them like a promise, like a blanket, like the answer to a question Lily had been asking since she was 2 years old, and her father's casket was lowered into the ground. Together. The courthouse in Burlington was a gray stone building that looked like it had been standing since before anyone could remember its steps, worn smooth by a century of footsteps, its hallways smelling of floor wax and old paper, and the accumulated anxiety of thousands of people who'd walked through its doors, hoping for justice or mercy, or just a fair hearing. Lily wore the navy blue dress Stella had bought for the occasion, the fabric still stiff and new, her hair braided neatly down her back in a style that had taken Stella 3 tries to get right. She clutched a folder that contained letters of support from Mrs. Halpern, from the school counselor, from the nurse who checked on her after the storm, from Reverend Matthews at the Baptist church, from people who'd taken the time to write down what they saw when they looked at Lily and Stella together. Stella wore a simple black suit that looked like it might have come from a thrift store, but had been pressed carefully and paired with a white blouse and low heels that made her look professional and serious and like someone who could be trusted with a child's future. They sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, waiting for their case to be called, watching other families come and go, some looking hopeful, others looking resigned, all of them caught in the same slow machinery of the system that ground through human lives with bureaucratic patience. Mrs. Crane arrived just before 9, carrying a briefcase and wearing a kind smile that reached her eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked Lily. "Okay," Lily said, which was only partly true but felt like the right thing to say. "Judge Caldwell is fair," Mrs. Crane said, settling onto the bench beside them. "She listens to the whole story, not just what's written in the files. That's all we can ask for." At 9:30, a bailiff with gray hair and tired eyes called their names from the courtroom doorway. The courtroom was smaller than Lily had expected, less like the ones on television with their high ceilings and dramatic lighting, and more like a large office with wooden benches and fluorescent lights, and a high desk where the judge sat looking down at the people whose lives she held in her careful hands. Judge Patricia Caldwell was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair, cut short in a practical style, and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, missing nothing, forgetting nothing. She looked down at the file in front of her, a manila folder thick with documents and reports in the accumulated paperwork of Lily's short, difficult life. Then she looked up at Stella and Lily, and when she spoke, her voice was neither warm nor cold, just professional and measured and careful. "Ms. Hartley, I've reviewed your petition for permanent guardianship of your niece Lily Hartley. I've also reviewed the reports from Child Services, the letters of recommendation, the financial documentation you have provided, and the home study conducted last month. Before I make my decision, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why do you believe this placement is in Lily's best interest?" Stella stood, and Lily could see the slight tremor in her hands before she clasped them in front of her, could hear the breath she took before she spoke deep and steadying. "Your Honor, I'm not going to stand here and say I'm the perfect guardian. I have a history of running away from hard things. After my brother died 6 years ago, I fell apart completely. I lost touch with my mother, with my family, with everything that mattered. I made mistakes that I'll regret for the rest of my life." She paused, and Lily could see her gathering herself, pulling strength from somewhere deep. "But 3 months ago, I got a phone call that changed everything. Someone told me my niece was alone, scared, and about to lose the only home she had left. And I realized that I had a choice. I could keep running from my grief and my failures and my fear of not being good enough. Or I could show up. Stella looked down at Lily, and the love in her eyes was so fierce it hurt to see. I chose to show up, and every day since then, I've chosen it again. I've gone to every appointment, filled out every form, attended every counseling session, learned how to braid hair and make school lunches and check homework and be present for another human being in a way I'd forgotten how to be. Her voice steadied, growing stronger with each word. I've learned that being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about staying when things are hard. It's about loving someone enough to do the work even when the work is uncomfortable and scary and makes you face all the parts of yourself you'd rather hide. She turned back to the judge. Lily has already lost her father, her mother, and her grandmother. She's lost enough. I'm asking you to let her keep her home, her school, her community, her roots, and me. I'm asking you to let us be a family, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm here and I'm staying, and I love her enough to fight for her every single day. Judge Caldwell made a note on the paper in front of her, her face unreadable, then turned to Lily. Lily, do you understand what's happening here today? Lily nodded, her throat tight. Can you tell me in your own words what you want? Lily stood up even though no one had asked her to, even though her legs felt shaky and her voice felt small. But she stood anyway because Stella was right about courage, because her father had taught her that the right thing was still the right thing even when it was hard. Her voice came out smaller than she'd hoped, but it came out clear. I want to stay with Aunt Stella. I want to stay in Grandma's house, the house where I learned to walk and where my dad used to visit when he came home on leave, and where everything still smells like the people I loved. I want to keep going to my school and seeing my friends and having Mr. Raven visit on Saturdays to fix things and tell me stories about my dad. She took a breath, and when she continued, her voice was stronger. I know Aunt Stella isn't perfect, but nobody is, and she's trying really hard. She makes me breakfast every morning and helps with my homework, even though math is hard for both of us, and she lets me talk about my dad and my grandma without getting shown or changing the subject. She's the only family I have left, and I don't want to lose her too. Judge Caldwell's expression softened just slightly, a crack in the professional facade. Thank you, Lily. You can sit down. The judge looked through the file again, taking her time, turning pages, reading reports, and the silence stretched out like a held breath, like waiting for test results, like standing on the edge of a cliff, wondering if you were about to fall or fly in. Finally, she looked up. Ms. Hartley, I'm going to grant your petition for permanent guardianship effective immediately. Stella's hand flew to her mouth, and Lily heard a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both at once. However, the judge continued, and the word landed like a stone in water, ripples of worry spreading outward. I'm going to require quarterly check-ins with child services for the next year just to ensure the placement remains stable and that both of you are getting the support you need. If at any point there are concerns about Lily's welfare or your ability to provide adequate care, this decision can be revisited. Do you understand? Stella nodded, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking when she spoke. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you so much. Judge Caldwell turned to Lily, and her voice was gentler now, almost kind. Lily, if you ever need help, if you ever feel unsafe, or if things aren't working out the way they should, you can always reach out to Mrs. Crane or to the court. Your voice matters. Don't ever forget that. I won't, Lily whispered, her own eyes filling with tears that blurred the courtroom into shapes and colors. The judge signed the order with a pen that scratched across the paper, making it official, making it real, making it permanent in the way that mattered to courts and laws and the systems that decided who belonged to whom. And just like that, it was done. Lily had a family again. They walked out of the courthouse into bright May sunshine that felt like a blessing, like a gift, like the world's way of saying yes to the question they'd been asking for 3 months. Stella pulled Lily into a hug so tight, it hurt so tight, Lily could feel her aunt's heart hammering against her own chest. And neither of them cared that they were crying in public, that people were walking past them on the courthouse steps, that the whole world could see how much this mattered. Mrs. Crane stood a few feet away, smiling with genuine warmth, and when Stella finally let go long enough to breathe, Mrs. Crane walked over and shook both their hands. Congratulations, she said. You've both worked incredibly hard for this. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Stella said, her voice thick with emotion, for everything, for believing in us when you could have just gone by the book. Mrs. Crane shook her head. I'll be in touch about those quarterly check-ins. But honestly, I think you two are going to be just fine. As they walked toward the parking lot where Stella's Subaru sat waiting, Lily noticed a familiar figure leaning against a black Harley near the courthouse steps. Arms crossed, face partly hidden beneath the brim of a cap, but unmistakable even from a distance. Raven. He'd come even though she hadn't asked, even though it was a Thursday and not a Saturday, even though he had no official reason to be there except that he'd promised to be the kind of person who showed up, and he kept his promises. When he saw them walking toward him, he straightened, and the question in his eyes was answered by the smiles on their faces before anyone said a word. She said yes, Lily called out, breaking into a run the last few steps. Raven's whole body seemed to relax, the tension draining out of his shoulders like water, like relief, like a weight he'd been carrying finally being lifted. Good, he said simply, but the word carried everything he couldn't say, all the worry and hope and fierce determination that had brought him here on a Thursday morning to wait outside a courthouse for news about a little girl who'd become something more than just his dead friend's daughter. Stella walked over and extended her hand, professional, even in this moment respectful of the boundaries between them. Thank you, Mr. Stryker, for everything you've done for her. For us, I can't ever repay you. Raven shook her hand, his grip firm, but brief, his eyes serious. Your brother was a good man who saved my life when I didn't deserve saving. It's an honor to look after his daughter. No repayment needed. He turned to Lily and his expression softened in the way it did only for her. You ready to go home? Lily nodded, and the word felt right in a way it hadn't in months, in years, maybe ever. Home. The Saturday after the hearing, Raven arrived at the farmhouse with a surprise that made Lily's heart stop and then start again, double time. He pulled up the driveway, towing a small trailer behind his Harley, and when he got off the bike and gestured for Lily to come look, she ran across the yard so fast she almost tripped over her own feet. Inside the trailer was a wooden swing, handmade with obvious care, with thick rope that looked like it could hold 100 pounds, and a seat carved from a single piece of oak that had been sanded smooth as glass and finished with something that made it shine in the morning sun. Your dad promised you a swing, Raven said, his voice quiet but certain. Figured it was time somebody delivered on that promise. Lily stared at it, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. You made this. Preacher helped. Man's got a gift for woodworking. Learned it in prison, actually, but that's another story. Raven smiled slightly, and Lily saw the care in every detail, saw the hours of work, saw the love made tangible in rope and wood. They spent the morning installing it on the old maple tree in the backyard, the same tree where the original swing had hung before it broke, the same tree Lily's father had chosen because it was strong, and its branches reached toward the sky like arms open for an embrace. Raven climbed the ladder to secure the ropes, testing the knots, 3 times pulling on them with his full weight to make sure they'd hold, checking and rechecking, because this mattered, because promises to dead men mattered, because Lily mattered. When it was done, when the swing hung perfect and level with the ground, Raven stepped back and gestured for Lily to try it. She sat down carefully, gripping the ropes, feeling the smooth wood beneath her, and Raven gave her a gentle push. The swing lifted her into the air, and for a moment she was flying the world, spreading out beneath her in shades of green and gold, the farmhouse small and solid behind her. Stella waving from the kitchen window with soap suds still on her hands from washing dishes. When she came back down, Raven caught the swing and held it steady. Your dad would have loved this, he said quietly, looking up at the tree, at the sky, at something Lily couldn't see, but knew was there. Lily looked at him. This man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago and was something else now. Something harder to name but no less important than family. Maybe even a kind of family itself. "I think he sent you," she said. Raven's eyes shone with unshed tears, but he didn't look away, didn't hide from the emotion. Maybe he did. That evening, after Raven had left and the sun was setting behind the mountains in streaks of orange and pink, Lily stood in the backyard with Stella and looked at the farmhouse. The paint was still faded in places. The shutters still hung a little crooked. There were still bills to pay and repairs to make and hard days waiting somewhere in the future. But the house was warm now. The lights were on. The garden Stella had planted was starting to bloom green shoots pushing up through the dark earth. And inside, two people who'd almost lost each other had found a way to build something new from the pieces of what had been broken. Stella put her arm around Lily's shoulders, a gesture that had become natural over the months, comfortable in the way things become when they're repeated enough to wear a groove. "You know what your grandma used to say?" Stella asked. Lily shook her head. "She said home isn't a place. It's the people who stay when staying is hard." Lily leaned into her aunt's side, fitting against her like a puzzle piece, finding its match watching the last light fade from the sky. "Then we're home," she said, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Summer came to Vermont the way it always did, sudden and generous after the long winter, turning the fields green almost overnight, and filling the air with the smell of cut grass and wild roses and earth warm enough to walk on barefoot. The farmhouse settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, the kind of normal Lily had stopped believing in after Grandma Rosemary died, but was learning to trust again one day at a time. Stella had gotten a full-time position teaching fourth grade at the elementary school, starting in September, which meant steady income and health insurance, and the kind of stability the quarterly reports to Mrs. Crane needed to document. She'd also started attending a grief support group at the church on Wednesday nights, not because anyone required it anymore, but because she'd realized she needed it, needed the reminder that healing wasn't linear and grief didn't have an expiration date. Lily spent her days riding her bike down the long driveway to where it met County Road 12, playing with Marcus in the woods behind his house, where they'd built a fort out of fallen branches, and helping Stella plant tomatoes and zucchini and cucumbers in the garden plot Grandma Rosemary had tended for 40 years. The soil remembered even if the people were different now. On Saturdays, Raven still came. Sometimes he brought work to do, fixing the wobbly banister on the stairs or replacing rotted boards on the barn that was slowly collapsing, but not so fast they couldn't save it. Sometimes he just came to sit on the porch and drink coffee and tell Lily stories about her father. Small stories she'd never heard, like the time Nathan had convinced the entire unit to learn the lyrics to a Broadway musical just to annoy their commanding officer, or the way he'd always saved the best parts of his MRE to share with whoever looked like they needed it most. He laughed harder than anyone when the things went wrong. Raven said one Saturday while they sat on the porch watching clouds build over the mountains. That was his way. He didn't take himself too seriously, made it easier for the rest of us to breathe. Lily stored every story like treasure, each one a piece of the father she barely remembered, building a picture of him. One memory at a time until he felt real again, felt present, felt like someone who'd shaped the world even though he was gone. In late June, Raven showed up with Preacher Doc Kid and Grizzly, their motorcycles lined up in the driveway along with a truck full of lumber and supplies that made Lily's eyes go wide. "We're building you a tree house," Preacher announced, grinning like a kid himself. Lily's mouth fell open. "Really? Really?" Raven said. "Every kid should have one, and you've got the perfect tree." They spent the entire weekend constructing it in the big oak near the swing, a simple platform with walls that came up to Lily's shoulders and a slanted roof covered in shingles and a rope ladder she could pull up when she wanted to be alone, when she needed space to think or read or just exist without anyone asking if she was okay. They let her help in real ways, not just the pretend helping adults usually allowed. They let her hammer nails and measure boards and paint her name on the wooden door frame in bright blue letters that would last for years, that would still be there when she was grown, and brought her own children to see the house where she'd learned that family was something you could build, not just something you were born into. When it was finished, when the last nail was driven and the last board painted, Stella made lemonade, and they all sat in the shade of the oak tree, sweaty and satisfied and tired in the good way that comes from making something with your hands. Thank you, Stella said to Raven, her voice quiet enough that Lily almost missed it. You didn't have to do this. Raven watched Lily climb up and down the rope ladder for the 10th time testing it, claiming it making it hers. Yeah, he said softly. I did. On the 4th of July, the town held its annual parade and fireworks display, and Stella asked Lily if she wanted to go. Lily hesitated because crowds still felt overwhelming. Sometimes too many people, too much noise, too many chances for things to go wrong, or for someone to ask questions she didn't want to answer. But Stella didn't push, just waited while Lily thought it through. We can stay home if you want, Stella said. Watch the fireworks from the backyard. Just us. That's okay too. Lily thought about it, really thought about it, weighing the fear against the desire to be normal, to do the things other kids did, to stop letting grief make all her decisions. Then she shook her head. No, I want to go. They drove into town and parked near the square where vendors sold fried dough and cotton candy, and the high school band played patriotic songs with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Lily held Stella's hand at first, but as the afternoon wore on and nothing bad happened, she let go, wandering over to the face painting booth, where a teenager with purple hair painted a small star on her cheek. She saw Emma from school and Marcus and a few other kids from her class, and they waved her over to where they were eating ice cream and complaining about summer reading assignments, and she went, and it felt easy in a way. It hadn't felt in months. Felt normal. Felt like maybe she was healing, even if she wasn't healed. When the fireworks started after dark, Lily and Stella sat on a blanket on the grass with hundreds of other people, and Lily leaned against her aunt's shoulder, watching the colors explode across the night sky in patterns that felt like celebration, like joy, like proof that beautiful things still existed in a world that had taken so much. You doing okay? Stella asked softly. Lily nodded against her shoulder. Yeah, I'm good. And she meant it. In August, Mrs. Crane came for her second quarterly check-in, walking through the house with the same clipboard and careful eyes as before, but this time with a smile that suggested she already knew what she was going to find. She noted the fresh paint in the kitchen that Stella and Lily had applied together over a long weekend, choosing a soft yellow that made the room feel sunny, even on cloudy days. She noted the repaired stove that actually worked. Now the new smoke and carbon monoxide detectors Raven had installed in every room, the refrigerator covered with Lily's artwork, and Stella's grocery lists and report cards that showed steady improvement. She asked Lily questions about school and friends and whether she felt safe and happy, and Lily answered honestly, not hiding the hard parts, but not pretending they were worse than they were. I still miss Grandma and my parents, she said. But I'm okay now. Aunt Stella takes good care of me. And Mr. Raven visits every Saturday. And I have friends at school. It's better than it was. Mrs. Crane smiled a real smile that reached her eyes. I can see that. Before she left, she pulled Stella aside while Lily was supposedly out of earshot, but was actually listening from the hallway. You've done remarkable work here, Miss Hartley. Truly remarkable. I'll be recommending to the court that these check-ins be reduced to twice a year instead of quarterly. You've more than proven yourself. Stella's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. Thank you. That means more than you know. Mrs. Crane squeezed her hand, a gesture of respect, between two women who understood what it meant to fight for something that mattered. You've earned it. One Saturday in late August, just before school started, and the summer began its slow surrender to fall, Raven came up the driveway and found Lily sitting on the porch steps, looking thoughtful, almost sad. What's on your mind, kid? He asked, settling down beside her with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Lily picked at the hem of her shorts, not looking at him. I've been thinking about my dad. Yeah, I don't remember him very well. I was so little when he died. Sometimes I try really hard to remember his voice or what his hands look like, but I can't. And sometimes I'm scared I'm going to forget him completely, that he'll just become a person in photographs instead of someone real. Raven was quiet for a moment, and Lily could feel him choosing his words carefully the way he did when something important needed saying. You want to know what I think? Lily nodded. I think you carry him with you in ways you don't even realize. The way you help people without being asked, like when you open that door for us, the way you're brave, even when you're scared, like when you stood up in that courtroom and told the judge what you wanted, the way you look out for the people you love, like how you worry about your Aunt Stella when she's tired. That's all Nathan. That's all your dad living on in you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal coin, military issued, worn smooth on the edges, from years of being carried, from being held in moments of doubt or fear or loneliness. Your dad gave this to me the last time I saw him, right before I rotated home, and he stayed for another 6 months. He said it was a reminder that we're stronger together than we are alone, that nobody has to fight their battles by themselves. I've carried it every day since. He placed it in Lily's palm, the metal warm from his body heat. I want you to have it now. Lily looked down at the coin, at the worn eagle, and the Latin words she couldn't read, and her vision blurred with tears. Are you sure you've had it for so long? I'm sure your dad would want you to have something of his, something real that you can hold. And I think he'd be proud to know you're keeping the idea alive, the idea that we're all stronger when we take care of each other. Lily closed her fingers around the coin and threw her arms around Raven's neck, hugging him tight enough that he had to catch himself on the step to keep from falling backward. Thank you, she whispered into his shoulder, into the leather and cotton, and the scent of motorcycle exhaust and Old Spice and all the things that meant safety to her now. Raven hugged her back, his big hand gentle on her head, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. Anytime, kid. Anytime. The night before school started, Lily couldn't sleep again, but this time it was different from the night before the court hearing. She wasn't afraid. She was excited. New teachers, new books, new projects. Marcus would be in her class again, and they'd already planned to sit together and work on their comic book during free reading time. She joined the art club and was thinking about trying out for the school play in the spring the way her dad had told Stella to do all those years ago, the way courage sometimes meant stepping onto a stage, even when your knees were shaking. She heard Stella moving around downstairs and she got out of bed and padded down to the kitchen in her bare feet. Stella was packing lunches for the next day, humming softly to herself a song Lily recognized from the radio. Can't sleep? Stella asked when she saw her. Too much thinking, Lily said. Stella smiled. Good thinking or worried thinking? Good, I think, mostly good. Stella set down the sandwich she was making and pulled out a chair. Come here, I want to show you something. She pulled a box from the top shelf of the pantry, one Lily had seen before, but never asked about, one that had sat untouched since Stella moved in. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe more, tied with string and sorted by date. Your grandma kept every letter your dad ever sent her from overseas. Stella said, her voice soft with reverence. I found them when I was going through her things after the funeral. I've been reading them one at a time, trying to get to know my brother again, trying to understand who he became after I stopped paying attention. She handed one to Lily, carefully chosen. This one's about you. Lily unfolded the paper carefully, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The handwriting was neat and precise, the words marching across the page in straight lines that spoke of discipline and care. Mom, she's walking now, really walking, not just the wobbly steps she was doing last month, but full-on running around the house like she's got somewhere important to be. Maggie says she's got my stubborn streak, which I'm choosing to take as a compliment, even though I know she doesn't mean it as one. I miss her so much it hurts. I miss all of you. I miss home. But I keep her picture with me, taped inside my footlocker, where I can see it first thing every morning. And when things get hard over here, when the fear gets loud, I look at it and remember what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting to come home to her, to build that swing I promised her, to teach her about the stars and how to throw a baseball and all the things fathers are supposed to teach their daughters. Tell her I love her even if she's too little to understand yet. Tell her daddy's coming home. Lily's hands shook so hard the paper rattled, and Stella wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her steady. He loved you so much, Lily, more than anything. And even though he didn't get to come home, even though he didn't get to teach you about the stars or push you on that swing, that love is still here. In this house, in the people who show up for you, in the way you keep going even when things are impossibly hard. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Can I keep this? It's yours, Stella said, her voice breaking just slightly. All of them are yours whenever you're ready to read them. Your dad's words, your dad's love, all of it belongs to you. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of people who'd loved them, and for the first time in Lily's memory, those ghosts didn't feel sad or scary or like absences that needed filling. They felt like company, like ancestors, like proof that love didn't end when people died. It just changed form, became letters and memories in the hands of strangers who showed up in storms. The first day of school came bright and clear, one of those perfect late summer days when the air smelled like possibility and the sky stretched blue and endless. Lily wore the new backpack Stella had bought, bright purple with silver stars packed with fresh notebooks, and the coin Raven had given her, tucked safely in the front pocket like a talisman. Stella drove her to school, and before Lily got out of the car, Stella reached over and squeezed her hand. You're going to do great, she said. I know, Lily said, and she believed it. She walked into the building with her head up, and when Marcus waved from across the hallway, she waved back, and when Emma asked if she wanted to sit together at lunch, she said yes, and everything felt possible, in the way things feel possible when you've survived the worst and discovered you're stronger than you knew. That afternoon, when Stella picked her up, Lily talked the whole way home about her new teacher who seemed nice, and the art project they were starting, and the book they were going to read as a class about a girl who saved a whole town just by being brave. When they pulled into the driveway, Lily noticed something new hanging near the mailbox. A wooden sign hand-carved and painted with care, the letters dark against the pale wood. Hartley House. And underneath, in smaller letters, Where Love Remains. Preacher made it, Stella said, her voice soft with emotion. Raven brought it by this morning while you were getting ready. I hope you like it. Lily stared at the sign, at the simple truth carved into wood, and her throat went tight with gratitude. It's perfect, she whispered. That night after dinner, after homework, after all the routines that marked their days, Lily climbed up to her treehouse with a flashlight and her father's letter, reading it over and over until she had it memorized, until his words became part of her own vocabulary, part of the story she told herself about who she was and where she came from. Below, through the windows of the farmhouse, she could see Stella washing dishes and humming the same song Grandma Rosemary used to hum while she worked. The swing her father had promised and Raven had built swayed gently in the evening breeze, empty but waiting. The garden stretched green toward the barn, tomatoes ripening on the vine like small promises. And somewhere out there on dark roads, she'd never see a man in black leather, wore a gray scarf, and carried the memory of a friend who'd taught him that the strongest thing a person could be was kind. Lily closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of summer giving way to fall, the crickets singing their last songs, the wind rustling through leaves that would soon turn golden red, the old house settling into itself with the confidence of something that had survived and would continue surviving. She thought about her father's promise to teach her about the stars, and she opened her eyes and looked up through the branches of the oak tree at the sky darkening above her. She didn't need him to show her anymore. She could find them on her own, could trace the patterns her father had once known, could connect the dots between past and present and future. But knowing he'd wanted to, knowing he'd thought about her even when he was so far away, knowing his love had somehow reached across years and miles and death itself to find her in the form of a man who kept promises he'd never spoken aloud, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. She climbed down from the treehouse as the first stars appeared and went inside where Stella was waiting with hot chocolate. In the book they were reading together, a story about a girl who learned that home wasn't a place, but the people who loved you enough to stay. Lily curled up on the couch, her head on her aunt's shoulder. The military coin warm in her pocket, her father's letter tucked safely in her room, and the sound of the old clock ticking steady and true. In the kitchen, counting seconds that added up to minutes, that added up to hours, that added up to a life. The farmhouse settled around them with a sigh, no longer holding its breath, no longer waiting for something to break. Outside, the stars came out one by one, ancient light traveling across impossible distances to reach a small girl in Vermont who'd learned that love was the thing that connected everything. The thread that ran from a soldier's sacrifice in Afghanistan to a biker's loyalty on a winter night, to a little girl's courage to open a door when opening it meant risking everything. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, between grief and healing, between what was lost and what remained, Nathan Hartley's promise lived on. Not in the swing he'd built or the stars he'd wanted to teach her about, but in the daughter who carried his kindness forward, who chose courage over fear, who understood that family was something you built with intention and care one day at a time, one choice at a time, one open door at a time. The storm had passed, the cold had lifted, and in a little white farmhouse at the end of County Road 12, in a kitchen where the lights burned warm against the darkness, in a home held together by love and second chances, and the quiet determination of people who refused to give up love remained. Not perfect, not unchanged, not without scars or struggle or days when the grief felt too heavy to carry, but present, real, enduring. A little girl who'd opened a door in a blizzard. 7 bikers who'd chosen to see her instead of looking away. An aunt who'd stopped running and learned to stay. A community that had shown up when showing up mattered most. And a promise made by a soldier who never came home, but whose love had found a way to save his daughter anyway, through the hands and hearts of people who understood that the best way to honor the dead was to take care of the living they'd left behind. Where tire tracks and melting snow had once marked the path of strangers becoming family, now flowers bloomed in the garden. Where fear had once kept a door locked, now it stood open to friends who visited on Saturdays. Where grief had once filled every room, now it shared space with laughter and hope and the ordinary sacred moments that make up a life worth living. The winter that had tried to take everything had failed. Love had proved stronger than loss. Presence had proved stronger than absence. And a little girl named Lily Hartley, who'd once believed she was completely alone in the world, fell asleep that night, surrounded by proof that she'd never been alone at all, that her father's love had been there all along, waiting in the kindness of strangers, in the loyalty of chosen family, in the enduring strength of people who showed up when showing up was hard. In the morning, she would wake to sunlight and the smell of pancakes and Aunt Stella singing off-key in the kitchen. In the afternoon, she would ride her bike and play in her treehouse and help weed the garden. In the evening, she would do homework and eat dinner and tell Stella about her day. And on Saturday, she would hear the rumble of a motorcycle coming up County Road 12, and she would run to the porch to meet the man who kept every promise, who taught her that family was a choice you made every day, who'd shown her that the best way to honor the people you'd lost was to love the people who remained. But for now, in this quiet moment between one day and the next, Lily simply breathed, simply existed, simply allowed herself to be a child who was loved and safe and home. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.